Welcome to a new edition of the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino. On this episode, we talk with conflict resolution specialist and speaker, Faith Wood. She brings an open and adventurous spirit to her work and is known for inspiring this in others. She is a brilliant observer and possesses a certain talent in zeroing in on challenges quickly, which will save teams from entrenched conflict and communication pitfalls that cost money and result in underperformance. Faith loves to solve a mystery and is always looking to figure out why someone chooses to behave in the manners they adopt. She has a history in law enforcement and knows how to run a stage effectively. We get into quite a bit. Enjoy this interview.
Thanks for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
No problem.
So before we get into your life as a conflict resolution specialist, I want to begin with probably one of the biggest events of our lifetime, which has been COVID. And I'm curious how you survived that time period and how it's changed the way that not only you do business, but the way that you live your life now that we're kind of coming out of it.
Great question. I think COVID was particularly challenging for those of us who are speaking for a living because conferences literally ended overnight. I can remember coming back from a big gig on March 13th of 2020. And the next day, all of my bookings were canceled, including a trip to Barcelona and Portugal. So it was this really huge event. Thankfully, my business has always been built on a bit of a triad. So I do speaking and training out in the field, and then I also do one-to-one coaching and consulting virtually and in person. So really, during COVID, I just did a quick pivot and started putting everybody into my virtual platforms. Not that the speaking and training really picked up that much, but certainly we saw a lot of people needing to have access for a couple of reasons. A lot of industries all of a sudden had to figure out how to do remote communication. So all their teams are now working from home, but they weren't as experienced in having a virtual platform as some of us were. And so not only did they have to learn how to lead from a distance, but also how to learn some of the platforms like Teams and Zoom and all of those other key platforms that became so important for 2.5 years. And then we saw this really interesting piece where we started to see a movement where people were getting very fearful. The communications and the narratives that were coming out relentlessly at people were be afraid, the virus is going to kill you, the numbers are too high. You just spent all of this time, if you were watching the news, being petrified that if you went outside and came in contact with anyone, you'd probably kill them. And so I think that really took a toll on the way that we communicate, in the way that we navigate stress. And certainly we saw a big rise or ramp up in conflict when people were coming in contact with one another. So not only do you have to now learn how to communicate on a virtual platform, but then when you're in the real world, how do you navigate people whose stress threshold is so incredibly high that they were so fatigued in general that their conflict responses were extreme.
To get a better handle on what you do exactly, let me take you in front of a bunch of grade school kids. Let's say second or third graders. You're at a career day and one of the kids looks up and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I teach people how to be nicer to one another when I'm talking to young kids.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I really think that, somewhere along the lines, we lost a little bit of civility. And, now people often speak unfiltered. There's not that pause that's so important before you respond to someone. And so we're just blurting out as if we were still anonymously speaking the way we see on social media. And so, I teach people how to be nicer to each other and why that's so important.
So when you were a kid, say second or third grade, what was your dream when you grew up? What did you want to be?
Oh, in second and third grade, I was going to be a pediatrician. but I remember getting report cards, and those report cards used to say, if Faith talked a little less, she'd learn a lot more. And I can remember even my mother bribing me from time to time with 25 cents if I could just be quiet for 5 minutes. So no one makes a living speaking. Well, I showed them, didn't I?
So are you happy with how everything turned out?
You know, I am so pleased with the way that I get to live my life now. I've come from government. You know, I used to be in law enforcement, and before that, healthcare, and before that, airlines. And so, you know, it's been this real big journey of being super attached to conflict for a long, long time. And most people run away. You know, they don't like conflict. They feel uncomfortable with it. And I would say my entire career I've leaned into it. But I was born a twin, so conflict is kind of part of the MO. You know, learning to be a collaborator comes from learning how to navigate the conflicts that happen every single day and to understand that everyone has a part to play. But, you know, we're all living quiet lives with a lot of unsettled affairs. And so a lot of conflict comes because we're carrying around so much baggage. And then we're reactive because we haven't managed the stress level, and we interpret everything as, you know, we interpret somebody saying something as a personal affront. And so we have to really learn how conflict is just friction. And if we can learn to navigate friction in more healthy ways by taking a pause, by controlling our own imagination and the stories we're telling ourselves, I think then we get to live a life that we only dream of. I would never have said I was going to have a career as a professional speaker, but I do remember as a young adult saying, I would just love to have somebody pay me to travel. And I suppose that's kind of what's happened, is that I get paid to travel to really great places, and people pay me for my opinion.
So you touched on some things that are very key in who you are and who you've developed into as a professional, but kind of take it back to your childhood a little bit more as a twin, and what specific seeds do you think were planted in you to speak as well as you do and to help people through very challenging parts of their lives?
Well, you know, as a twin, I think that, you know, I'm an identical twin, and so I was the firstborn. And so I've always kind of been a bit of a leader, you know, pushing the way forward and going first and taking the risks. And, you know, I was raised by some incredibly fabulous humans who felt that being able to express yourself and being articulate were important skills to master. And they always gave us an opportunity to speak the way we needed to speak and to express what was bothering us. And you know, I often spoke for my sister. I can remember as kids, you know, doing things, and then when she wouldn't speak up, I would. So I think that there's that bit of, you know, being comfortable, being the leader has come from, you know, being the firstborn and in a matching set.
So the one thing that we draw strength from in our lives are the people that we look up to. Who's been a role model or a hero for you in your life?
A role model and a hero would be my folks. You know, my parents have been, you know, married for a really long time. They're pushing 55 years, and they're just this incredibly in love couple who looks at relationships as something that no matter whether they're having ups or downs, they're always finding that place to be super grateful and happy about the lives they're living. And there's not that huge disappointment. They're excited by life. They travel. They're each other's best friend. And I think that that's really rare today. So, you know, when I look at how messy relationships can get, I think sometimes people just quit too early. And I was lucky enough to have role models that never quit on anyone. They didn't quit on each other. They didn't quit on us. They worked really hard to create moments where family was so important to them, and those connections and those relationships were super important. So it sounds kind of trite to say that your parents are your hero, but I really do think mine developed this sense of, you know, be passionate about something and be willing to speak up when something's important to you, but do that in a way that doesn't offend. Do that in a way that incites curiosity and provokes thought. and gives people a reason to believe in something.
So if you can meet anybody alive on the planet right now, spend some time and talk to them, who would you love to meet and talk to?
Oh my gosh, what a question. So many. So many people that I would want to sit down with. Joe Navarro, I would love to just sit and pick his brain one day. I really, gosh, tough question. Most people say a celebrity. Most people would say royalty. I think there are lots of people that I would just want to sit quietly with. I mean, even somebody like a Dolly Parton, just to figure out how in a world where she was so challenged, in an era where it was really difficult to be a female entrepreneur, would just be really fun to sit with her and hear her life story and how she went from living in impoverished places to becoming this, movement and this real influencer. But there's so many people even closer to home that I would absolutely relish the opportunity to be standing beside.
So, the one thing about our lives is that, every day we wake up, we have things that we want to do, and we're motivated to do those things. What is the motivator for you? What is it that drives you every day to get up to do the job that you do? What
drives me every single day is, so I'll give you an example. I woke up this morning to a testimonial or a review on my most recent book, Fractures, which was dedicated, it was a really difficult book to write. And it was all about, dealing with toxic personalities inside your own family. And I think that it's often easier to navigate toxic relationships when they're from afar. You can quit your job, you can go and apply somewhere else, but inside your family, there's so much baggage attached to that, so much emotional energy. But this morning I woke up to a note from a reader, and the note said, "Hey, I just finished reading your book, Fractures, in Cuba while I was on holidays. It was so impactful, I read it twice. Thank you for taking the time to write it." And that's the stuff that inspires me. When I go into the hospital and I'm working with a team on civility and learning how to navigate that. A lot of the work that I do is with people who are making a big difference in other people's lives, and they're so important. And yet the stressors and the conflicts are making it really difficult to deliver. So when you get somebody who says, "Thank you for the Jedi mind tricks," that moment when that just made my life so much easier, I was almost giggling for the rest of my shift. That's why I do what I do. I think we've all had careers that are tough and moments that are tough. And if I can help somebody find a simpler way to navigate it with a sense of humor and a sense of curiosity and an opportunity to be more pragmatic and less reactive, that's why I love what I do.
So let's say at the end of the day, you're done with everything and you lean back and think about your day. How do you quantify a successful good day for you?
A successful good day. I got the 3 main things that I wanted to get done off my list. I'm very task-driven. But also I've had some incredible interactions with some people that made a difference. I gave them some simple strategies. They're giving me some insight into how that deployed in their day. And everyone's smiling at the end of my day. I get some time with my grandkids. I get some time with my husband, and I probably got a good hour in the park with my golden retrievers. Perfect day.
Absolutely. So let's put a scenario out. Let's say you have a dream tonight. You run into your 20-year-old version of yourself, and you have to give that version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom and the paths that you've chosen that have led to you now. What advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, so much advice I'd give me. In my 20s, I was so uptight, and I was trying to, prove that I was the right choice, that, I really could do what I was doing. Back then, I was moving into my law enforcement career, and I was really feeling, I don't know, under the microscope. I was one of the first females in uniform, and it was a really tough time. I think the advice I would give myself is, this will pass. This moment, you've got the skills, take a breath. stand up and don't stay silent. Just one of the biggest tips I give many people now is that often things feel worse because we're so fixated on what's wrong. So I give myself advice to say what's right. Focus on what I can do, not what I can't do, and know and trust. Trust that the skills and the purpose and the discipline that you bring to every single day will pay off in dividends. And it's such a short period of time. We often think there's such permanency in it. But we wonder, am I going to keep this job? And it keeps us awake at night. I had a mortgage to pay and kids to feed, and my 20s were just tough. And I think now I would see the good. I would remind my younger self to see the good in people, to see the humanity in it, and not to take things so personally. One of the strategies that I talk about often is going deep with difficult people. And I had lots of them back then, including myself. But going deep is an acronym. Don't defend, don't explain, don't engage, and don't personalize. Go deep. So, yeah, that would be the biggest tip I'd give myself. Stand up tall, take a breath. You got this.
So you already mentioned the letter you got, but is there another letter or is there one that you've gotten in your life that's been pretty resounding that you've always remembered, one of your best fan letters?
I would say not, but probably the best email that I ever got that has really profoundly impacted me for decades now came from law enforcement. And it was one of those times when I was taking things really personally. And I had become the president of the Law Enforcement Association. And I was at a conference, and these few individuals were kind of campaigning against me. And instead of realizing it was just this small number of people, I heard the things and then I magnified it. I made it about everybody. And I assumed that I was going to be removed from the position. And I remember standing up and calling for the vote, and it was a resounding vote. There was really only those handful of people that had been campaigning, and they weren't successful. And it was a real shock to the system. And after that, I got a letter from one of the gentlemen that were in the room, and they said one of the challenges that you will face is that you will assume that a small number represents the opinions of everyone. You are one of the most ethical, in integrity individuals I've ever had the pleasure of working with. Remember that when you're making decisions in the future. Fascinating.
So, yeah, absolutely. No, that's wonderful. So everyone out there has a perception or an idea of you, your family, your friends, your clients, your readers, but ultimately you live your life. You're in control of it. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I'm an ever-changing project. I think lots of people think I've got all the answers, and I think my perception of me is that I will find the answers. That I'm willing to be resourceful, and that I stay very, very honest, both with myself and with other people. But diplomacy is a skill, and so is having a sense of humor. And so if I keep both of those in tandem, I'll probably navigate most of the most challenging things that I will come in contact with. And that's what I believe. So I spend a lot of time really paying attention to how we show up in the world. And I truly believe that our personalities are a bit of a brand. And so, how do you want to be remembered after you leave the room? And I'm very conscious about that. So I try to live a life. I really focus on living a life that is resourceful and polite and candid and direct. So what do I need to do to show up on my best day? And then how can I help other people do the same?
So, Faith, if anyone out there wants to get, your books, anybody wants to learn more about you and your services and hire you, anything related in your world, where's the best place to go?
They can hit my website. Inspiring Minds Consulting Limited is my company. And so my consulting business is at imind.ca, as in I really do mind most of the time. And The other one was if they wanted to grab my books and see what I'm doing, as a fiction writer and as a nonfiction writer, they can hit faithwood.ca.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you for opening up, taking a minute out. Have a great new year. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for tuning in to another famous interview with Joe Dimino, where we cover the world of art, literature, business, spirituality, music, and more from around the globe. If you want to hear more interviews, visit the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino channel on YouTube. You can also find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and until next time.